Hello, everybody, and welcome to Jack's Corner. My name is Tarzan Banano, and with me, as always, is our founder, Jack Figgle. How you doing, Jack?
Oh, pretty good, Tarzan. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory to him forever. So today we're talking about the second time you had a papal audience with our current Pope, Pope Francis. Is this correct?
That's right.
All right. So how did the second one go down? We all heard how the first one went just a couple
Yeah.
episodes ago.
Yeah. So this was in the year 2016. So now, 8 years ago. It was 2 years after the previous one when Viking Travel had asked me to organize an ecumenical pilgrimage. And in 2016, 2 years later, we attempted to do another one with Viking. Um, but the number of people signing up to go on the trip was not tracking to generate the numbers that Viking needed in order to make it worth their while to do all the travel arrangements. And since I had been to Rome and Istanbul on my own quite a bit,
You
I
had
thought,
the
well,
chops to do it.
yeah, I knew how to do it if I just put the time in. And so I decided that we had enough for me to at least organize a smaller pilgrimage and not cancel altogether.
Mm.
Um, so it took place, I think, in the summer of 2016. And our plan was to go, as I said, to Rome and Istanbul like we had in 2014 to visit the sites, have an audience with Pope Francis, and then go to Istanbul, have an audience with Patriarch Bartholomew, and see the sites there. However, in the spring of that year, the citizens of Turkey decided to try to overthrow the government of President Erdogan. And so there was an attempted coup that made traveling to Turkey rather dangerous for Americans. And in fact, the State Department issued a travel warning to not go anywhere near Turkey because of the unrest of the government. They were putting civil servants in jail, and it was just real messy. And I talked to everyone who had signed up, and they all agreed that we should drop Turkey from our planned trip
Just go to
uh,
Rome.
and go to Rome. But then to make it a little more interesting, I organized a itinerary for us to drive from Rome to Bari, down in the southern end of the boot of Italy, which was where the relics of St. Nicholas are now uh, housed, and then drive up along the old Byzantine coast of Italy.
Mm.
Eastern coast of Italy had come under the jurisdiction of the Byzantine Empire at its height of influence. And so the whole of the eastern coast of Italy was filled with Byzantine architecture, churches, and it's where today the Italo-Greek church traces their roots. So there is a Byzantine Italy and a Byzantine Italian Eastern Catholic Church, and the east coast of Italy from Bari in the south up to Ravenna in the north. And Ravenna, for those who have studied any architecture, is a very large center of beautiful and exquisite Byzantine mosaics. And Ravenna is known for its mosaics. So we changed our itinerary. We kept the Rome part, but we tacked on our own extended trip to the rest of Italy.
to the to the Byzantine Italy, which
That's right, to see the Byzantine Italy. Um,
now that's gonna be on my my personal Italian bucket list.
yep, there you go. It's it's I've been to Bari and Ravenna on other trips separately, but I'd never driven between them. And so we rented vans in Rome in order to transport the 12 of us that were on the trip. One of the other pilgrims was a Byzantine Catholic priest from North Carolina, Father Richard Rohr. And so we designated him to be the other van driver and myself, and we rented them at the Rome airport after we'd done 3 days of touring in Rome itself, because in Rome itself, you don't need a van. You don't have any place to park. And we just, walked or took taxis around Rome. We didn't even spend the money to get a tour bus. We just got a tour guide and just traveled around by taxi or on foot. And then we got a transfer out to the airport, rented the vans, and then drove. And I'll just wrap up that part of the trip and get back to the audience. And that was that on our way to Bari, the group wanted to stop at Pompeii, which is very close to Naples, and to see the ruins of the city that was covered by the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius back around the 1st century.
I can't blame them. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, and it was on the way, so I agreed that we would stop there and walk around. Trouble was, it took us so long to get the vans and then drive all the way down there that we got into Pompeii sort of like 4 o'clock. We only had about 2 hours of daylight left, and then they closed the ruins of the city, and then we had to drive in the dark another 3 hours or more through the mountains of southern Italy and over to the other coast in order to get to Bari. And I think we got to our hotel about 1 a.m, exhausted from driving all day, and so it was a somewhat difficult trip. But we had.
You had
Go
what?
ahead. We had all day the next day in Bari. I scheduled it so we spent 2 nights in Bari and 2 nights in Ravenna. So we would travel on one day and use one whole day for seeing the sights and having a liturgy in both places.
Fair enough. What I was saying was, I had flashbacks to my honeymoon because we went to Alaska and the entire first day was just like 13 hours on a plane. So we got there at like almost 3 a.m.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was it. I was just like, oh, flashbacks.
Right. When we got to Bari, we had a hotel right on the main square, which was great. We could walk to most of the sites, to the Basilica of St. Nicholas, where his remains are underneath the main altar, and they have a crypt church. And Father Richard used to study in Rome, and so he knew his way in and out of these places. And so we had a liturgy there at the tomb of St. Nicholas, and then went up to Ravenna along the coast and had a liturgy in one of the old Byzantine churches there, and then drove back to the airport and flew home. So we had a small group, and when I had requested the audience for our group with Pope Francis, the response I got was that week the Pope's schedule was already filled, but that if we wanted to, we could attend the general audience in St. Peter's Square with reserved seats. So as a special VIP group, but at the general audience and not in the Apostolic Palace like we had done 2 years before with just a private audience. And so it turned out to be, a very, very different trip, a different audience than I'd ever had before. And this second meeting that I had with Pope Francis was now number 6 in my list of meetings with popes. And this is the first time it was going to be outdoors at that general audience. The Pope has general audiences on Wednesday mornings, in St. Peter's Square. And if the weather is inclement or when it gets cold in the wintertime, they have it inside St. Peter's Church. But we were there in the summertime, and so it was outdoors in St. Peter's Square. And we didn't know 100% of what we were in store for, because all we were told was to come to the office of Cardinal Koch, which was the Pontifical Council for Christian Unity, where we would get our ticket for the group for the special access to that general audience. And not having ever done this before, I really didn't know what to expect. But I thought best to take the whole group with me to that office so that we were all together and find out what we were supposed to do once we got this ticket. Well, the Pontifical Council is at the end of the street that leads to St. Peter's, and so it was only a 2 or 3 block walk to get to the piazza. And the instructions we received was simply show this piece of paper to the guards as we got closer and closer to the basilica, walking across St. Peter's Square, the piazza, which is the big round area in front of the basilica with the obelisk. So we took this piece of paper, and of course it was all in Italian. And the envelope said, His Eminence Callistos. And that was because the original plan was for Metropolitan Callistos to join us, as he had in 2014. But he was starting to decline in health, and so he canceled at the last minute joining us. I told Rome that he was not going to be with us, but they seemed to ignore that, and we got the special VIP ticket anyway. So
you just use his name. It's okay. It's whatever.
Yeah.
Nobody. If you get in trouble, it's like I told them. They just didn't listen to me.
That's right. So knowing how Rome works, we just sort of went along for the ride, and whatever happened, happened. So I took this piece of paper, all in Italian. It was not like a colored ticket that I knew was used for the huge crowd of 100,000 people. And the different colors got you closer and closer at each checkpoint to get to the steps that led up to where the chair was going to be, and the canopy that they have just down the steps from the main doors. And that's where the Pope sits for a general audience every Wednesday. And the crowd has a barrier at the bottom of the steps, and then the crowd fills in all the way across the piazza, and then depending on how big the crowd is, down the street, all the way to the Tiber River sometimes. And if you remember seeing scenes from the funeral of John Paul II, the crowd not only went to the Tiber, but it wrapped around a few city blocks of people wanting to get in through to St. Peter's to just visit his body, when he laid in state in St. Peter's. So I had this piece of paper and the group following me, kind of like the Pied Piper. And we showed it to each Carabinieri or the Vatican police, and they would keep saying, prego, and show us the way to keep moving closer. We got to the security checkpoint where they checked for metal detector and so forth, and went through there and got clearance. And then we went to the next checkpoint. Finally, we got to the one at the bottom of the stairs, and one of the butlers came over in his full morning suit, tails, gold chain across his vest, and he read the piece of paper and said, blah, 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 prego, prego. So he escorted us up the steps, across the front at the top, in front of all the diplomats and bishops and archbishops. And we went right to the very first row of chairs that had been put down for this particular audience. And we were walked all the way to the first row and the first chair closest to the throne where the Pope was going to sit. I had no idea that this VIP ticket was going to get us so close with such immediate access.
Yeah, for those listening, when he said that you can't see anything because this is an audio podcast, if there were subtitles, it would just be blank stare, blinks thrice. That was my reaction to that.
Yeah. Now, for that trip, I had been in touch with a Romanian Orthodox iconographer named Maria, who has a studio and a training institute for iconography in Rome. And I'd been there and met her and commissioned a few things in the past, bought some icons. So I was in touch with her months before, and I said to her, I've given the Pope's books in the past when I go for these visits. Why don't I would like to now try giving him an icon. And what more appropriate icon than a unique one of St. Francis himself? You don't see too many icons of St. Francis in the general population of icons.
No.
And so we commissioned her to paint one for us. And so she did. And she created a special box. And we, we're thrilled. It came out beautiful. And so I took it with me. And we kept asking the butler if I could present it to him, because all we knew was we were going to sit in this first row. And his English was not too bad. And he said, just wait, just wait. And so at the end, after an hour, well, let me back up a little bit. The Pope arrived in his Pope-mobile and literally drove amongst the audience, amongst St. Peter's Square, all up and down every aisle, blessing and greeting and letting people get up close to him. And that took like 45 minutes to an hour. And we were up on the first row, right up on top of this. And, we were in our seats, and I was in my cassock. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to get up and sort of walk around. So I walked up to the top of the front row and walked across a little bit. And on the other side, there was just coincidentally Bishop Zubik of Pittsburgh, the Roman Catholic Bishop of Pittsburgh, of course, where I grew up. And I'd met him 2 or 3 times because he always came for the Right to Life March. And he was the bishop who led the rosary in the Basilica after we had our Byzantine compline service. So he was always in the sacristy when we were finishing up, and I would go and greet him. So I, met him a few times in Washington. And so I went over and greeted him and said, I'm Jack Fiegel, Oriental Lumen in Washington. And he said, oh, yes, and we chit-chatted a little while. And I said, oh, why are you here? And he said, well, I have a group with me, but they're out there in the crowd someplace. Well, it sort of made me feel pretty good that I was with a group and they were up here on the front row with me.
Everybody, you were just ushered in after you, and there you are, knowing somebody, a bishop, but somebody. But your whole group got to go, and he was just there alone. It's funny.
Yep. So as I'm walking
That must
past,
have been a really important paper.
yeah, exactly. Like I said, I don't know what it said, but it said something good because we got top VIP treatment. And I was walking back across the top of the steps, and I'm looking out, and the crowd is gathering, and the Pope is going through his Pope-mobile thing, and the crowd keeps filling up. St. Peter's Square was completely packed, and they start going down the street. And I think I heard someone tell me that the square holds 100,000. And if the crowd gets over 100,000, they start going down the street. So I was standing up there, up on the steps, looking at this crowd of 100,000 people, all of them looking up at me. wondering, who am I in this black cassock, and I'm looking down at them, watching the Pope go by. So when his Pope mobile started to get closer, I walked back over to our chairs, and of course, we stood. In those early days, 8 years ago, he was still in pretty good health, so he walked up all the steps to the throne. I think these days, the steps are designed to be more like bumps, and so the Pope mobile can actually, I think, drive up the steps and drop him off at the top if they need to. Anyway, he sort of walks up all the steps and nods to everybody that's up there on top, and of course we're all giving a round of applause. And he goes and sits down at the papal chair, says a few words in Italian, and then they start a little bit of I guess it's a reflection. So the general audience is about 6 or 7 different clergy that come up to the microphone, and they read a 2 or 3 minute reflection in all kinds of different languages. I don't know if it's about scripture or the saint of the day or just general stuff. Anyway, and then when they're done, the Pope has his own exhortation of whatever he's going to talk about that day. So we were up on the front row in the first row of chairs through all this, and I'm sitting there, and I think I took my video camera with me and sat with it on my knee and video recorded the whole thing from my vantage point. So I have a video of the whole thing from up on top of the steps, focused on the Pope when he's talking on the podium when someone else is. And so we get through the audience. He's there maybe 45 minutes, and we're sitting, like I said, no more than 25 feet away. And the audience is over, and he stands up, and the butler comes over to me, and he says, follow me. And I said, how about my group? And he said, yes, all of you. So we all walked around to the back of the platform, and the Pope is in his chair greeting all the bishops one by one that were there. They get, special preference at that point. But when he finished with the bishops, there were, I think, 3 ecumenical groups. We were one of them that were up in these special chairs. And I think the other 2 were Protestant. So with Callistos, I guess, as the head of our group, we were the Orthodox ecumenical group, even though most of us were Eastern Catholics.
Yeah. Y'all submit to Rome, but you were in place of the Orthodox.
That's right.
A very, very important piece of paper.
Yeah.
It's like all of you are coming.
Yeah, we did have one Orthodox deacon with us and his wife. So, and I think, let's see, that trip, we had his son and his daughter-in-law. So of the 12 of us, we actually did have 4 who were Orthodox. But the rest of us were all Eastern Catholics.
And there were 2 Protestant groups.
And there were 2 other groups up there. But when the audience was over, just the way we were situated, we were invited to then come up and greet the Pope as the first of these ecumenical groups. And the way it worked was the Pope stood up at where his chair was. We were escorted in a single line, so every person got to greet him one by one. I went last because I had the gift. And so we had prepared a speech in Spanish, and Father Richard Rohr, who came with us, knew Spanish fluently. And so we had it all typed up, and I'd taken Spanish in high school. So the plan was, worst case, I was going to get to meet the Pope myself to present my icon, and I was going to read the speech to him that explained who we were, why we were there, and all that sort of thing. And what the icon, I'm sure he knew what it was. But because the whole group went, I gave the piece of paper to Father Richard, and I said, here, your Spanish is better than mine. He'll understand you better. You read the speech, and I'll just show him the icon.
Okay, real quick, since you said his name a couple of times, you Richard Rohr, Byzantine Catholic. That's
Yes,
is it the same Richard Rohr as that's a Franciscan friar, or is it completely unrelated?
completely unrelated.
Okay, then they have a very similar name.
Yeah. Father Richard Rohr was a Byzantine Catholic priest for about 30 years. He studied in Rome. He was a very, very staunch traditional Byzantine Orthodox kind of priest.
Definitely the opposite of the Franciscan.
Right. He was
How do you
given the
spell his
parish
name?
Rohrer.
All right, okay, so
And he had the parish assignment of our parish in Cary, North Carolina, outside of Raleigh. And he was such a traditionalist that all day long, no matter what he did, he wore a cassock over a pair of shorts. If he went grocery shopping, if he was house cleaning, he went to church to pray, whatever he was doing, he was a real monk, if you will, and kept a very austere life, um, and was also very heavily involved in a version of the Project Rachel group in the Raleigh area, and hosted many of their meetings, which was, a support group for women who had had abortions. And in fact, he was invited to go to Ukraine by the major Archbishop Sviatoslav to start a Project Rachel for the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church all over Ukraine. And he went on a trip to, visit parishes and start the program. And I don't know all the details, except that there was one parish where they were having some sort of celebration, and they were playing ethnic music, Ukrainian folk dancing or something. He was out, sort of, enjoying himself, had a massive heart attack, and died on the spot.
yeah, I am currently looking at the obit for him. I was
Yeah.
trying to the
What
entire
what year
time
did he? What year did he die?
um when was this published?
I'm thinking 2016 or 17, a couple of years after this trip.
Yeah, it doesn't actually have it. It just says July 14th.
Okay,
It's not written as if it's supposed to be read later than the date.
right.
Yeah,
But anyway,
but
he
it says
died
that.
in Ukraine, um, and I don't know too much else. He was transferred for about 6 months from Raleigh to a parish up in eastern Pennsylvania, and was the vicar of the parish. So he was sort of, moved from the parish, even though he'd been there 30 years. The bishop moved him, and then from up there he went to Ukraine, and that's when he passed away. So, and he was about my age, maybe a little younger. So I think he died in his late 50s, early 60s.
66, according to
Okay,
this.
all right.
Yeah, no, I was trying to find this priest that you were talking about. I was like, there's no way a Franciscan friar was gonna be on
No,
this trip.
no, no. So Father Richard read the speech. I presented the icon, and joining our group, because of course, when you have a private audience or you have a meeting like this, you have to list all the names in your group. And I added to the group that traveled with me the name of the local iconographer, Maria Gali, I think is her name. And so we have a picture of me presenting the icon, Father Richard in the background reading the speech, and Maria standing next to me, looking with great pride at her icon that Pope Francis is getting.
I've seen the picture. Didn't
Yeah,
realize that's who it was.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
So
I am new
that's
to this
why
whole Byzantine
that's why
stuff.
yeah, that's why she's there. So it was a fantastic audience, and then after each one of us greeted them, and I presented the icon, which then of course an assistant took away quickly. We all then sort of gathered around the Pope, and we got a couple of group pictures that are now sort of historic, and each person has a picture of them greeting the Pope because the Vatican photographers take 3 or 4 digital pictures for every person that meets them, and then you can go and order them, and you can do what you want with them afterwards. And then after the Pope greeted us and the other ecumenical groups, behind us on the steps of St. Peter's must have been 200 couples who had just been married that week, and they were all there to get the papal blessing for their marriage. So it was again first time for me. And when the Pope and his entourage went back to give the blessing and walked back and forth in front of that group, we were then sort of left on our own, and we walked back down the steps and back through the piazza and went to look for a place to get lunch, which turns out to be a bit of a challenge at the end of a general audience, because you have 100,000 people that are in St. Peter's Square, that all of a sudden, when the audience is over at 12:30 or 1 o'clock, they scatter and fill up all the restaurants within, a half a mile walk. So it took a while for us to finally find a place to have lunch. But that was our papal audience that was unique. The only one I've done that was at a general audience rather than private, up in the palace, and it was just a small group of about a dozen of us, 1 or 2 from my parish, some Byzantine Catholic friends from Michigan and Ohio, Father Richard, the deacon and his wife and his son and daughter-in-law. So it was a mixed group. We had a deacon, a priest, and a reader, and the rest were lay people. And it was quite a highlight, certainly for everyone that was on the trip, that they all got to get a private blessing and greet the Pope individually, which we did not know if that was going to happen when we went. It all just sort of happened once we were up on that top ledge.
Well, I mean, you walk away with a fantastic story, and I'm sure none of them will ever forget that. Being able to be front and center for a general audience that ended with, just directly meeting the Pope and getting all the pictures in the world.
Yep. Yep.
So
Uh,
that's amazing. I want to one day go on a
well,
pilgrimage first.
we'll put in an early plug that I'm starting to plan a pilgrimage in 2025. So just next year. I'm not sure what time of year yet. It's certainly going to be after Easter, but whether we go in the summer or the fall is still up in the air. I'm leaning towards the summer because that's when college students have time off, professors have time off, most people go on vacation, and so going in the summertime rather than in the fall means that more varied people can join us rather than just retirees. And so the plan is to go and spend a couple of days in Rome, and hopefully organize another private audience of some sort with Pope Francis, and then go to Istanbul, have a private audience again with Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, and then go to Nicaea and see the sites where the first and seventh councils were held, because 2025 will be the 1700th anniversary of the first Ecumenical Council of Nicaea of 325, when the date of Easter was agreed. And then I'm trying to organize, I'm not sure which ones we're going to get to or if we can get to them all, I'd like to try to organize a combination flight and bus trips to go to the 7 churches of Revelation.
Okay. Well,
So watch
everybody,
this
mark your
space.
calendars.
Yeah, watch this space. Most likely in July after our Oriental Conference, as we did last year. We went in July, and we won't be going to the Holy Land. I don't think the Holy Land is going to be a place to visit for quite some time when it's secure enough. So instead, we're going to go to Rome and Istanbul and spend more time in Asia Minor visiting all the churches that we can get to by bus easily. So watch this space for more information as we plan and get more details put together.
Absolutely. I'm assuming you've concluded your Papal audience story, so just some house cleaning, telling y'all. On Friday, last week, because today is Monday for everybody listening. On Friday, we released the first episode of Ecumenism with Ted Januszewski for the subscribers to the podcast. You can get access to that for just $4.99 subscribing to the podcast, and more stuff will be coming out. But the first taste being already up and ready for y'all to take a bite out of. Besides that, thank you for telling us the story of the general audience this time, and thank everybody listening for coming to this episode and listening. And we will see you next week. God bless and goodbye.